Welcome, Explicados. Today, we're jumping right into the fast-moving, electrifying, and epic journey of Queen's classic lineup. We're going to explore the rise, the immense risks, and the immortal legacy of one of the absolute most dynamic bands in music history. Now, this isn't just your standard story about a group of musicians. Oh no, this is a blueprint. It's a blueprint of how excess, huge risks, and a relentless connection with the audience built an absolute musical monster. Okay, let's dive into this explainer. So think about it. How exactly did four completely different personalities completely rewrite rock history for massive stadium crowds? Well, the short answer, an impossible creative collision. You see, they weren't just a backing band for a charismatic singer. Not at all. They were four incredibly distinct, often fiercely contrasting forces that constantly pushed, pulled, and challenged each other to create something way, way bigger than the sum of its parts.
Let's take a trip back to late 1960s London. The pieces were all there, but they hadn't quite snapped together yet. Brian May and Roger Taylor were playing in a band called Smile. Brian was already building this highly personal signature guitar sound, and Roger, well, he was bringing that absolute powerhouse drumming. But then, in 1970, this art student named Farrokh Bulsara, who you and I know as Freddie Mercury, enters the scene. And Freddie didn't just want to stand there and sing. He wanted spectacle. He wanted drama. He wanted a massive theatrical identity. So he renames the band Queen. But they still needed one final piece of the puzzle. Enter John Deacon in 1971. He was quiet, incredibly precise on the bass, and honestly, his calm demeanor was the absolute perfect counterbalance to Freddie's wild theatricality.
Now, here's the thing you really need to understand about Queen. They didn't just rely on one main songwriter. Nope. Their creative engine was this fierce, highly competitive clash of four brilliant minds. Think about it. You've got Freddie driving the theatricality and those unforgettable melodies. You've got Brian acting as the grand architect of these massive, towering guitar walls. Roger is just injecting pure, raw energy and character into the mix. And John is delivering absolute precision and these extraordinary, groovy rhythms. Every single one of them was a composer. And honestly, it was this constant internal competition that really pushed their music to the stratosphere. But, massive success didn't just happen overnight. In 1973, their debut album really showcased their studio experiments, but they were still kind of stuck grinding it out in small venues. Then, things started to accelerate. In 1974, they pushed their theatricality to the absolute limit with Queen 2, before finally landing a massive, undeniable commercial breakthrough with Killer Queen. That was the track. It proved to the world, and honestly to themselves, that their heavily layered, totally exaggerated sound wasn't some kind of flaw. It was actually their greatest advantage. So the really crucial point is what happens next. Fast forward to 1975. They're successful, sure, but behind closed doors, they're really struggling financially. They desperately, desperately needed a massive hit. Now, the logical thing to do here would be to play it safe, right? Just write a standard, catchy, 3-minute pop rock song for the radio. But Queen, they did the exact opposite. They risked absolutely everything on a song that completely defied all conventional radio logic. They basically gambled their entire future on an impossible track. And the architecture of that massive gamble was, of course, Bohemian Rhapsody. I mean, just think about this song's structure. It starts as a ballad, transitions directly into a literal opera section, and then just explodes into hard rock. There's no conventional chorus, and it's way, way too long for standard radio play. To actually pull this off, they pushed analog studio technology to its absolute breaking point. Picture this. Endless tape reels spinning, duplicating, and layering vocal upon vocal, physically stacking sound waves to create this massive operatic choir out of just a few guys in a room. It was an absolute masterpiece of studio engineering. And wow, did that gamble pay off. The album, A Night at the Opera, and its Totally Impossible single sat at #1 in the UK for 9 solid weeks. It literally turned Queen into an unstoppable international force. But here's the big takeaway. Here's why this really matters. This success established their golden rule. It proved, once and for all, that Queen could infinitely mix genres, jump from style to style, and exaggerate their sound as much as humanly possible, all without ever losing that core Queen identity. So after proving they could absolutely dominate the studio, the next step was proving they could dominate massive live crowds. Enter the stadium era in 1977. Stomp, stomp, clap. You know the rhythm.
Songs like We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions were engineered, literally designed from the ground up, for immense audience participation. They crafted their music so that the crowd didn't just watch the show. The crowd essentially became the fifth member of the band.
By 1980, they were pivoting yet again. Remember quiet, precise John Deacon? Well, he brought this incredibly tight, minimalist pulsing bass riff into the studio, and it pushed the band into entirely new territory. That riff, of course, became Another One Bites the Dust. It was this massive, totally unexpected dive straight into funk and dance music, and it just perfectly proved how any one of those four guys could grab the steering wheel and drive Queen toward a massive worldwide hit. But, extreme creative freedom definitely comes with a cost. Entering the early 1980s, the band started pulling in some really disjointed directions. They were juggling hard rock, synthesizers, funk, and pop all at once. And this era, it brought severe tension. You had fatigue from just constant grueling touring, members were starting their own side projects, and then there was a very controversial shift with their 1982 album, Hot Space. That record resulted in a much less stable relationship with their audience, especially over in the United States. That unified, unstoppable mission they had in the 70s was definitely starting to fracture. Thankfully, in 1984, their album, The Works, sparked a much-needed recovery. Massive hits like Radio Gaga proved they absolutely still had the magic. But the musical landscape had changed, right? They were no longer the new, eccentric kids taking over the world. They had to prove with absolute certainty that they still dominated it. They had to show everyone that the rock and roll throne was still theirs to claim.
Which brings us to the ultimate test. July 13th, 1985, Live Aid at Wembley Stadium. Imagine this. Facing an absolute sea of humanity, Queen had to share the stage with dozens of the biggest artists in the world. And even worse, they were completely stripped of their massive lighting rigs, their signature special effects, and their usual perfectly tuned stage production. It was broad daylight, folks. It was literally the exact type of environment where a band could easily just disappear into the background.
They had literally 20 minutes. That's it. The clock was aggressively ticking. In just 20 short minutes, Queen had to win back the entire world. And they did it. But they didn't do it with special effects. They did it through pure, raw electric connection. Every single dramatic pause, every vocal run was timed to absolute perfection. Freddie Mercury somehow managed to reach out and treat a sprawling stadium of tens of thousands of people as if they were just one single person sitting in the front row. It was an absolute masterclass in crowd control. Right in that massive wave of revitalized energy, 1986 brought their most monumental stadium tour yet. I mean, the audiences were now fully multi-generational. The peak of this epic run happened on August 9th, 1986 at Knebworth in England, playing in front of an absolute ocean of people. But behind all that triumph, there was a very quiet, profound reality. Nobody in that massive crowd knew it at the time, but Knebworth would secretly be Freddie Mercury's final concert with Queen. Just like that, the massive touring machinery came to a halt. Freddie's health was deteriorating, a reality he chose to keep entirely private. But the band, they didn't stop working. In fact, they retreated into the studio, shifting their focus from those monumental stadiums to quiet, intimate nighttime recording sessions. They channeled this huge, dramatic, downright defiant energy into their final albums together, The Miracle and Innuendo. Because even when time was running out, their music was always designed to sound larger than life. Then came 1991. The touring had stopped long ago, but the music continued. And then, imagine 4 brightly burning stage lights, and one of them just slowly fades to black. The loss was simply immeasurable. On November 23, 1991, Freddie's illness was finally confirmed to the public. Tragically, he passed away the very next day. Now, what's really crucial to understand here is that Queen never actually published a formal statement announcing a true breakup. They didn't have to. Freddie's passing meant that the irreplaceable, classic 4-member lineup that had driven the band for 2 incredible decades was just over. The massive tribute concert at Wembley in April 1992 served as a beautiful public celebration, sure, but it was also a definitive farewell to that specific, magical era. But, the story actually has a deeply respectful epilogue. Before his passing, Freddie left behind some final, incredibly moving vocal recordings. So in 1995, Brian, Roger, and John worked together to complete those tracks and release the album Made in Heaven. A couple of years later, in 1997, John Deacon, that quiet, precise anchor of the band, chose to officially step away and retire from music. Brian May and Roger Taylor, however, chose to keep the legacy alive, and they continue to perform and collaborate to this very day. So the classic quartet ended, but as empty stages continue to light up with new, multi-generational audiences singing every single word, it proves the ultimate paradox of this band. The four distinct personalities that formed Queen absolutely ended their run, but the music they created, music that was specifically brilliantly engineered to connect with and be sung by massive crowds, has completely outlived the lineup itself. Remember, everything is explained here. See you in the next video.
Enjoyed it? Join the Explicados, subscribe up here, and leave your comment below. I might read it in the next video.